In high school, I find one of those little shards of light. For a couple lonely last years of kiddom, when my vowel-heavy, foreign, weird-sounding last name subjects me to ridicule and torment, imagination and writing have become my playmates. But in high school, imagination and writing become my passports to friends. As a member of the yearbook staff, I have access, in those days, to an office. I have a master key for the entire school, in fact. Can you imagine that? And in the office, there is an old workhorse of an IBM Selectric typewriter. You remember that, just keep your hands down. And it has a somber black cover, but it's covered with extraneous fingerprints and little interpretive splashes of whiteout. I spend many, many hours with this behemoth, and I am so elated by the promise and the freedom I feel in that space and in these new relationships, that I feel as if that machine has an actual spirit. And sometimes I even chat with it a little bit. Now, decades later, I think about that old workhorse when I'm introduced to the Japanese Shinto idea of kamis, spirits which live in this belief system within everything. I mean, if a spirit can live in a bell, why not a typewriter? The kamis are like those shards, small and improbable scraps of light in the divine, embedded in everything, portals into our natural senses of wonder. Every now and again, we are reminded that life and creation exist. And today, on January 11th, we are well into this new year, back to our routines and our everydays, and working through a lot of time without mystery and awe and connection. I'm going to make the case here today, though, in my first sermon among you for this year, that we ought to consider inviting amazement into at least a few moments of our lives, in whatever form that works for us, because it allows us to step into the wholeness of our lives and of our world. Sit, wait, listen, wonder, be aware that the world is truly awesome. All of this is heart food. Amazement and wonder and simple curiosity are sort of the appetizers into a richer banquet of life than we can have if we're caught up only in the day-to-day, the routine, the documented. And just in case you don't really feel much like talking to a typewriter, there's some other options. You can commune with trees or muse with stars. You can sit and look intently at someone, really look at someone that you love. Although, as someone who does this, I do need to warn you, it's good to let you know you're going to do this. Otherwise, it can kind of weird them out. As we've been learning in the Minister's Wednesday night drop-in class, which is going to resume again this week, it's focused on the intersection between science and the spirit. These kinds of experiences are not, as we might have once thought, opposed to the realm of fact. Scientists dwell, as Michael Dowd's words illustrate, every day in the realm of awe. Or more shocking to me to learn, mathematicians need imagination to do their craft. And even in the midst of lives which are busy and overscheduled and driven, even in a world where one has to be active in resisting possession by possessions, even and especially in times when we seem to be in some way divided from the very earth on which we live, and our peoples divided one from another. Stopping for wonder with all of this around can seem frivolous, and yet it might be essential. Living on the East Coast until 6.5 years ago, I taught my children to chase fireflies. Now, when we go back, we notice that the fireflies themselves are harder to find, and so is the time to look for them. The naturalist poet Terry Tempest Williams writes, "We have become so insular, so busy and obsessed with a capitalist work ethic to fuel our mindless consumption, we forego the blessing of birdsong. In the process of becoming civilized, we have become, perhaps, inhuman." Now, technology is a wondrous thing. I don't know if you noticed, I had to go over and get my cell phone because someone had written a joy or concern that was actually in there. Here we are in 2015. And later this year, Scott Kelly will begin a year in space, while his identical twin, Mark, also an astronaut, will stay here on the Earth, so that between them we can know the effects of this particular voyage on the human body. And in March, a solar-powered aircraft is going to attempt to circle the entire Earth. And yet, we need this form of creation in moderation. People are starting to talk about the need for periodic digital detoxes. And not only that, but we need to have a world that allows us to take in our larger human sensibilities. So an alien who was watching us from outside might actually decide that our cell phones are one of our most precious things. Few of us actually imagine bequeathing them to our offspring as our inheritance, do we? So listen, know, exclaim, be. In these ways, we can mine the hope that is nestled in amazement. We can stop and simply contemplate our capacity to know. We can create places where we touch the astounding, for there we just might learn something we don't know. And in the face of the most mind-bending truths, even in the face of death and hatred, and the least common denominators of the human race which seem to be on our screens every day. We can walk arm in arm with all for a while, and in doing so find an opening for some of those emotional channels which allow for the depth of human experience. Through amazement, we are reminded that the life of the world shines at many levels, and we can choose how deeply to explore its luminance. When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. Now some of you, looking at the cover of the Order of Service, might be wondering if I noticed that in the poem, the bride is married to amazement. Yes, I did. And I still kept saying it wrong. And I think that's because it means that if the bride is, well, this is a rather heteronormative metaphor, but if the bride is married to amazement, then the bridegroom is as well. The one that Oliver says has the world enfolded in arms. For me, that truly makes sense. For to embrace the world, its beauty and its deep connection, and its deep and rending ugliness, we have to have the strong arms of wonder, the courage of awe. We do not choose between the world of knowledge on one hand and the world of knowing. The fullness of our lives lives between them both. The 19th century transcendentalists were enamored of science and all the ways that the limits of the mind could be embraced. And their contemporary, the naturalist poet Richard Jefferies in England, made a point, as we heard in our meditation, to go out every day and pay attention. With his resulting experience, he rejected the idea that he was a simple creation of ancient religious myths on one hand, or that he was just, on the other hand, an elegant machine of science. He believed that the truth lay somewhere in between. He believed this along with Emerson and with Thoreau, and he knew the value of touching the earth and spending time there. Now, wonder can walk really closely with weirdness, as we all know. It's a thin line, and everyone has to draw it for themselves. Joy is not fashionable. Amazement is not something easy to talk about at the company holiday party or with your Martha Stewart wannabe neighbor. We have, though, this deep yearning to understand and to explore the outer galaxies of what it is to be a person and to walk in the perimeters of what we know towards something that is beyond and which we grasp might be a little dangerous. We each have within us, I believe, a tiny sliver of a poet's heart. That's one of those shards of light that's lodged within us. It's the host who finds just the right color of blue to make the sky on the table. It's the friend who can listen without judgment like no other. It's the photographer who sees and captures the intricacy of light on a beloved's face. And it's the mother who drinks in the pattern of the leaves against the sky before turning to her whining child. Or the commuter tracing the path of a raindrop on the window of the BART train. And while, like Jeffries, you might fear scorn in those moments, just might be worth it. We have many, many, many choices in our days to devote a few moments to awe in the amazing gifts of music, in the explosion of your heart when you first behold a long-awaited infant, in the wide landscape of prayer and meditation, in the precious music of water falling, even in your own sink, in the miraculous, somehow, dawning of another day after a long night, in the capacity of an individual human being to take an idea and make it something real and tangible in the world, in the choice to live in a culture of curiosity rather than a culture of critique. Open, receive, connect, be, know. Unlike cynicism, the false friend who can show up offering diversion during times of struggle, amazement is actually a steady companion, the kind who offers thoughtful gifts when you most need them. Some of our world leaders have understood the need for such connections in the face of problems that daunt and paralyze the merely analytical side of our minds. U Thant was the native of Burma, the first Asian to serve as Secretary General of the UN, and he described spirituality as the tuning of the inner person with the great mysteries and secrets that are around us. He was a man concerned with the largest problems of our world. His idea, though, was that being in touch with the wondrous and the mysterious gave him an image of the individual in relationship to the whole of life, and that broke open his thinking. Writer Mark Nepo suggests that by being what we are, by attuning our own yearning to the lonely holiness of this world, we will aid humanity more than by any particular service we might render. So absorb, attend, notice, exclaim. Allow yourself to vibrate with the spirit of the world. The world in which we live requires us to engage with it at a level of depth, to be still to its truths for what we face today, what we face as a society, what we face as a nation, what we face as a global community is not going to be solvable by thought alone. It will require a wholeheartedness, a whole beingness to understand that we must alter our relationship with the earth. We must alter our relationships within the seething pulse of the human family. Writer Terry Tempest Williams, an advocate for our planet, says, "Could it be that the mind of the earth is a cosmic mind, As we witness the stellar eyes of galaxies burning down from the heavens, our bodies and the bodies of stars are made from elemental fire. Each of us is married to the ongoing spiral of life. We live and we die and we continue through the blades of grass which cover our graves. A friend told me recently that in her part of the Jewish tradition, which is of course a wide spectrum, salvation is the idea that we just heard about in our time for all ages, the idea of the parts being made whole and put back together, the gathering up of the shards. And yet what is essential is the breaking of the shards to begin with, so that you can have the reconnecting. One need not be a poet, only to live truly in our age, to know the truth of Mary Oliver, who says, "I do not want to end up having simply visited this world." Even those of us who are firm in what we don't believe can hear Richard Jefferies, who bids us across the centuries go higher than a God, deeper than a prayer, and open to a new day. In our amazement, we can understand our deepest yearnings, touch that loneliness which is at the heart of the human experience, and at the same time, feel ourselves held. Mark Nepo writes, "The world is not complete until fitted with our yearning, that just as the earth would be barren without trees and plants and vegetables and flowers, the holiness of the world waiting just below the surface will stay barren without the spirited growth of our dreams, our creativity, our generosity, and our love." It seems, he says, that the first destiny of being here is to root our being in the world, because this world needs this as much as we need each other. To know the fullness of the human experience, we have to take a little time and walk a ways with wily curiosity, searching for shards like shark's teeth on a beach, or glimpsing a deeper perspective, spotted like a rare bird, or fanning that little spark within us and within which we encounter a divinity which speaks from within our hearts. And it's through this knowing that we are able to be truly present to our world, to hold in awe its majesty and its messes. In this way, we know the true power of this little light of mine, which speaks to our belief that each of us carries that spark of the divine. So in this year, this 2015, what will happen if we take a few of those seconds of each day to be the bride married to amazement, or the bridegroom, or a guest, or even the photographer at the wedding? In our own way, may we take these vows then to heart, so that when the lonely holiness of the world leaves us breathless, may we bravely enter into relationship with all, remembering that we are made of stardust, a vessel for some small but precious shard of light. Wonder, ponder, notice, and most of all, be amazed. Be amazed.